Hey everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. Now if you're watching this video, I bet you just completed the installation of your Delta EverEdge shower base. So congratulations! We're now ready to move on to installing a matching wall set and finishing up your enclosure. Now if you haven't installed an EverEdge shower base yet, be sure to check out our separate video that will walk you through those steps first. Now in this video, the shelves on the wall might look a little different than yours at home. Note that any differences are purely an aesthetic design feature and won't affect any of the installation steps. Okay, when starting any plumbing related project, it's always a good idea to shut off the water supply. So be sure to do that before starting the installation. Before we begin, we want to make sure you're watching the right video. Let's confirm a few things. First, take a look at your installation booklet or packaging to confirm what series you selected. Now this video will cover installing the Delta EverEdge 48x34 shower wall set. Note that the shower wall set in this video may look a little different when I get into the step-by-step process, but don't worry, all the installation steps will be the same. However, if you have the 60x32 inch shower wall set, be sure to check out our separate video we have for that. Now keep in mind, building codes are different everywhere. Also, if there's a task that seems a little bit beyond your abilities, we definitely recommend contacting a professional for a little bit of additional help. You can also make sure you're totally comfortable with all these steps by reviewing this video before fully diving in. It's also good to know that this is really a two-person job because there are certainly some steps along the way that are going to require an extra set of hands. One thing to note, we'll be using a dual-purpose polymer adhesive and sealant for our install. However, you can also use construction adhesive that's labeled Safer Plastic or an advanced waterproof sealant. Next, let's collect the tools and supplies we may need to complete this installation. Those include a drill, some safety glasses, a caulk gun, adhesive, sealant, a tape measure, a staple gun, some sill plate gasket, a level, a Carpenters Square, some shims, a drop cloth, a pencil, a utility knife, a 3/16 inch drill bit, a bit holder extension, a driver bit, 1¼ inch stainless or zinc plated truss head screws, 2½ inch construction screws, a hole saw, some lumber, some gloves, and some sawhorses. Okay, if you're ready, we're ready. So let's get to it.
The first step is to make sure that our walls are plumb and square. Now before we do anything, we went ahead and placed a piece of cardboard down on our base to protect the surface. All right, so grab your long level. I'm gonna step inside and we're gonna check to make sure that each one of our studs here is plumb. So place your level against the stud and make sure that the bubble is in between the lines at each one of our stud locations. If you need to correct something, now is the time to do it.
Also, we want to make sure that our walls are square. So to do this, I'm going to be using my Carpenters Square. Again, inside my alcove, I'm going to start at the top, checking the top, the middle, and the bottom on each side, making sure I'm getting good contact with my studs on each side of my Carpenters Square. Now, as Hannah mentioned, this is really important to make any of those final corrections at this point because it's going to be our last opportunity and it will ensure that the installation will go smoothly down the road. So, if everything's looking good in your opening, let's go ahead and move on. Next, we're ready to add some blocking to our existing framing that will help provide some additional support for our wall set. Now, as you can see in my opening here, I've already added this blocking so I can walk you through the steps and also show you what the finished product is going to look like. Now, the location of the blocking is important. So along the back wall, I'm adding it to the middle two stud bays and in the middle stud bay on each of my side walls. The height is also important too. So on my back wall, I want to make sure the blocking is located 48 inches above my bottom plate of my rough framing. So I'm going to take my tape measure, measure down back behind the shower base, making sure I'm contacting the rough framing and measure up 48 inches. Now on the side walls, something similar except the height's going to be slightly different. I want to make sure the sidewall blocking is located at 50 3/8 of an inch off of my rough framing. So just like the back wall, taking my tape measure, making sure I'm measuring off of that bottom plate, 50 3/8 of an inch up on my sidewalls. Now, the material I'm going to be using for my blocking is either 2x4 or 1x4 material. You can see I'm using 2x4 material in my empty stud bays on my back wall and also the empty stud bay on my side wall here. However, I'm going to be using 1x4 material for my rough plumbing wall because it provides just a little bit of extra clearance for all the rough plumbing back in that cavity.
And when I mount this blocking, I want to make sure that I'm mounting it perfectly level and also perfectly flush with the front of my existing framing. And then to lock everything in place, I'm going to use 2.5-inch long construction screws. So with all that said, go ahead and cut your blocking to size, get it installed, and then come back here and we'll be ready to move on to the next step.
Next, we're going to install some door nailers. Now, door nailers are going to add some additional support, so if we're installing a shower door after our wall set. Now, technically, if you're not planning on installing a shower door, you could skip the step. However, I think it's a great idea to go ahead and do this either way. That way you future-proof your installation. So if down the road you do decide you want to add a shower door, you're totally covered and can do that. Now, when I install this door nailer, I want to make sure it's offset from my existing framing by 2 3/16 of an inch. So I've measured that out and made a reference line at the top and at the bottom of my nailer here. Secondly, when I go to install this, I want to make sure that the bottom of my door nailer is sitting above the flange of my shower base by 5/8 of an inch. So I've made a reference line there, but you can also see that in the shower base installation, I had to cut a little bit of additional blocking and I cut it to that height so I know exactly where this door nailer is going to go. When I go to install this, I think it's best to keep an eye on both of those reference lines. So my bottom reference line here at 2 3/16 of an inch, and then also my other reference line, making sure again that the bottom of my door nailer is 5/8 of an inch above the flange. Once that's in place, I'm going to go ahead and secure the bottom, then work my way to the top, again keeping an eye on my top reference line and securing it up there to make sure I'm getting a good consistent 2 3/16 of an inch from the top to the bottom. Now, a little bit of a pro tip is if you have a couple clamps handy, you could clamp this in place, which will make it just that much easier to secure it to your existing framing. Once I get my first piece done, I'm going to use my second piece, attaching it directly to the back of this first nailer, making sure it's even along the face, the top, and the bottom. Once I've got these two installed, I'm going to repeat the same exact steps on the other side.
Now it's time to dry fit our panels in place. Now again, you want to make sure that your water is off because we did go ahead and remove the test cap on our mixing valve just to make sure it's out of the way when we go to dry fit our side panel. Okay, so we're going to start with our back panel. We're just going to center it in the opening and then place it down on our shower base. Okay, then we'll do the side. And I know that this is the correct side because my flange is at the top and on the side. And these just slide into place. So just line it up and then apply some pressure. Perfect. Move on to the next side. Again, the mixing valve is on this side, so you're never gonna get it tight to the wall. Okay, great.
All right, now we want to check for alignment that we have our wall set dry fit into our opening. Now there's a couple things I'm keeping an eye on specifically. I want to make sure that the front edge of my wall set is even with the front edge of my shower base, that I'm getting good consistent contact between my wall set and my shower base all the way around and also up the corners. And I also think it's a good idea to go ahead and check the alignment of the top of the wall set, making sure it looks nice and even all the way around the opening.
Okay, once you've got it where you want it, take a pencil. And you're gonna make a reference line at the top of your flange at each one of your stud locations. You're also going to make a reference mark in the center of your flange at each one of your stud locations for your pilot holes.
And while Hannah's doing that, I also think it's a great idea to go ahead and mark your pilot holes down the leading edge flange of your wall set. So you're gonna be drilling 6 holes in those locations, roughly spaced evenly from the top to the bottom.
Yep, so go ahead and get your reference lines marked. Then we're gonna take out our panels and drill our pilot holes.
Next, we need to determine the center point of the hole that we need to cut in the side panel to accommodate our mixing valve. So to do this, we're going to be taking 2 measurements. First, a vertical measurement that's going to be measured from the deck of the shower base to the center of the mixing valve, and then a horizontal measurement that's going to be measured from a line that's plumb with the front of the shower base across to the center of the mixing valve. So for my first measurement, my vertical one, I'm going to use my tape measure, making sure I'm sitting the tape measure on the deck of the shower base, and then to the center of the mixing valve, and making note of that measurement. Now for the horizontal measurement, again, I want to make sure I'm measuring a line that's plumb with the front of the shower base. So for this one, I like using my long level, making sure it's contacting the shower base at the bottom there, keeping an eye on the bubble to make sure I'm holding it perfectly plumb, and then using my tape measure to measure across and make note of that dimension for my horizontal measurement. Now, with both those measurements, that's going to determine the center point of the hole that I want to drill in my side panel. However, it's important I stress this, we're only going to get one shot at drilling this hole correctly. So I think it's a great idea to do a test run on a cardboard template that I cut out of my packaging material to make sure I have that hole exactly in the right place where I want it. So here's my cardboard template I've cut out, and there's a couple things I want to point out. First is, I've put an arrow on it to make sure I know which way is front and which way is up. Also, it's very important that we make sure we have perfectly straight edges along the front edge and the bottom, and that those two edges are at a 90-degree angle to one another. You'll also notice that I have a little notch cut out of the bottom edge there, and what that's for is so when I put my template in place, I can make sure that it's sitting tight along the deck of the shower base, but also fits over that front dam, that little lip on the front edge of the shower base there. Okay, so once you get your template ready, we can move on to transferring our measurements to this template and cutting out our hole. So to transfer our measurements to our cardboard template, I'm gonna first place it face up, and then I'm gonna take my vertical and my horizontal measurements, keeping an eye on my reference arrow to make sure I'm measuring off the right edges. So, first my vertical measurement, coming off the bottom of my template, right about there. And then my horizontal measurement off the front edge of my template, right there. Now the intersection of those two measurements is going to be the center point of the hole that I need to drill in my template. But also the size of the hole is going to be important. We want to make sure that we're drilling a hole that's large enough to accommodate our rough valve, but also not too large that will interfere with our finish trim that we're going to install down the road. So once you get your center point marked on your template and you know the hole size you want to cut, let's go ahead and cut that hole and we'll double check our measurements. All right, I've got the template all cut, so let's give it a test fit. So first I'm going to keep an eye on the arrow to make sure I've got it in the right orientation. I want to make sure that my template is sitting evenly along the deck of my shower base and that the front edge is also even with the front edge of my shower base. Once that looks good, I'm going to check the location and the size of the hole, and mine's looking pretty good. So now that the template looks great, I can be confident that I have the right measurements that I need to transfer over to my side panel. So when ready, let's move on to do that.
Okay, now it's time to transfer our measurements onto our wall panel. Now have the panel up on sawhorses because we are about to drill the hole for our mixing valve. And it's very important that you make sure that you have the correct wall panel. You also want to make sure it's in the correct orientation. So I know it's facing up, and I know that that's the bottom because it's the shorter side with no flange. All right, so this is where it's really helpful to have two people. You're going to take your tape measure and put it on the bottom lip. And it's helpful to have one person hold the tape measure level while the other person gets a bird's eye view to transfer that measurement.
As Hannah said, you want to make sure that the tape measure is perfectly level, and then you put your eye directly above that vertical measurement and transfer it to your wall panel in pencil. All right, so I've got my first measurement. Now we're going to do our horizontal one. Similar idea, making sure that we're contacting the front edge of the panel, staying level, getting my eye directly above that point I need to transfer, and then transferring it down to my wall panel. All right, great. So now that we found the intersection of those 2 points, we know the center line, or the center point of where we want to drill that hole for our mixing valve. However, I can't stress this enough. You want to double check and triple check this measurement to make sure you're drilling in the exact right position, because we only get one shot at this. So if you're comfortable with your position, let's go ahead and drill the hole. So I've got my hole saw here, and you might want to drill a pilot hole to make sure you keep that hole saw perfectly centered as we start. Or you can just make sure you're very careful and go very slow to start to make sure you're getting it right where we want it to go.
Okay, we're ready to install some foam tape. Now, the foam tape has an adhesive side, and we're going to be applying that to the flange of our shower base. Now, the position of the foam tape is important. We want to make sure that it starts just to the inside of the front dam of the shower base. And also, we want to make sure we're locating it towards the top edge of the flat portion of the upper flange. So just below that top lip. So once you're ready, we're going to start by peeling back just a little bit of the paper backing. And then again, checking that position, making sure I'm starting it just inside the front edge and then towards the top of the flat portion of the flange. It's okay if we're going over the screws. I'm just going to work my way around the opening, making sure I'm staying in the right position and getting good even contact between the tape and the flange. As I get to these back corners, I wanna make sure that I'm getting the tape all the way back in that corner. So, give yourself a little extra and push your finger to make sure it's sticking all the way to the very back of the corner there. Continue working your way all the way around the opening, and we'll finish up on the other side. Now, as you get towards the end of the opening, we want to make sure that the tape ends at the same location that it started at the other side. So if you have a little bit extra, that's totally okay. Just be sure to trim the excess with either a utility knife or a pair of scissors. But we want to be careful that we're not going to damage our shower base while we do that. Okay, now we've got that all in place, so I think it's a good idea to go back around one last time just to check for 3 things. First, I want to make sure that my location looks correct all the way around. Second, I want to make sure that I'm getting good, even, consistent contact between the tape and the flange. And also, just double check those corners to make sure you have the tape set all the way back in each one. All right, with all that said, let's go ahead and move on to the next step.
Now that we have our hole for our mixing valve cut, I'm gonna apply a fire retardant pad to the backside of that panel. So I've turned the panel around, this is the backside facing out, and I'm gonna apply this pad as evenly over the hole as possible. Now the pad has adhesive on 2 separate sides here. I find it's easiest to go ahead and peel off one side, and then center that over the hole. All right, once you're happy with the position, I can peel off the other side. Making sure it stays nice and flat against the panel. All right, that feels good. So now we can go ahead and cut out our mixing valve hole from the pad. So I'm gonna use my utility knife, kind of feel for where the hole is, and then cut an X shape between the 2 sides. And then from there, I'm going to work my knife around the perimeter of the hole the rest of the way. All right. I've got that hole all cut out, so now we can get on to installing our wall set.
Now we're ready to apply some sill plate gasket to our rear wall framing. Now the reason for the sill plate gasket is for some noise reduction, and it's not included in your materials, so you're gonna have to purchase it. We're gonna hold it in place using my staple gun, and the location's gonna be important. I'm gonna start at 4 inches down on each of the 3 middle studs along my back wall and run it all the way down, ending 2 inches above the top flange of my shower base. I'm also gonna add little pieces to each of my blocking that I added earlier. So, once you have your sill plate gasket ready to go, let's move on to installing it along the rough framing. Next, we're ready to apply some adhesive to our back wall framing. Now, you can use an adhesive that's safe for plastic or an advanced polymer sealant. Similar to what we did in the previous step, we're gonna start 4 inches down from that top reference line, except this time we're gonna run all the way down, stopping at the top edge of the shower base flange. We're gonna do that on both corners and also in the 2-inch gaps we left below the gasket and above the flange in the previous step. And for the bead size, we wanna make sure that the bead is roughly 2 times as thick as that gasket that we just installed. So, let's get to it. All right, now we're ready to install the back panel of our shower wall set. So I'm gonna carefully lift it up and put it into the opening. Making sure I press it tight against the wood framing behind, and now I want to check for alignment. So I'm going to check the bottom to make sure that my panel is sitting fully on the deck of the shower base. Check each corner, make sure nothing's pinched, and then also check that top reference line that I drew during the dry fit phase to make sure everything looks like it's aligned perfectly. Once it does, we can move on to securing this panel into place. So to do this, I'm going to use 1¼ inch long truss or pan head screws. You'll also notice that on my drill, I'm going to be using an extended drill bit holder to make sure that the spinning chuck of the drill doesn't come in contact with my wall panel, which could cause a little bit of damage. Also, when I secure these screws in place, I'm going to go through each one of those pilot holes that we just drilled and make sure that I don't over tighten them because that could damage the flange. And then finally, as I work my way around the opening, I want to check for the gap between the flange and the wood framing behind. If I have any gaps that are greater than, say, 1/8 of an inch, I want to use a shim to make sure I close that gap before inserting the screw. All right, that's looking great, so we're ready to move on. Next, we're ready to start prepping our rough framing to accept the sidewall panels. The first step is going to be applying some sill plate gasket, just like we did for the back wall. However, there is a slight difference. This time we're going to start again 4 inches down from the top reference line that we drew earlier, but we're going to extend it all the way down to the top edge of the flange of the shower base. Also, we're not going to be adding any sill plate gasket to the additional blocking that we added earlier. So we're going to repeat the same steps on both sides and the middle 2 studs, and then we'll be ready to move on. Now for this next step, you could technically skip it if you're not planning on installing a shower door. However, I definitely recommend you go ahead and do it either way to help future-proof your installation. That way, if down the road you change your mind, decide you want to add that shower door after all, you're totally covered. What we're going to be doing is adding a bead of sealant to our shower base. We're going to start along the top of the flange here, head right along the very top of the front dam for 2 inches, and then take a right-hand turn and go directly back into the shower base for another 3 inches, making kind of like an L shape. Now we're gonna do the same thing on both sides, and don't worry, it will be totally covered once we install that wall set. So when you're ready, let's go ahead and do that now. Now we're ready to install our side panel. So I'm gonna carefully lift it into my opening, taking care around my rough plumbing and also that bead of sealant I added in the last step. I'm gonna begin fitting it together with my back panel, and then with a little push from the front, it'll snap together, fully engaging. Just like that. Okay, so now it looks pretty good, so I wanna check for my final alignment. I'm gonna check along the deck of my shower to make sure that the side panel is sitting fully and evenly along the deck. I'm also going to check along the front edge here, making sure the leading edge of my shower panel is perfectly in line with the front edge of my shower base. I'm going to check along the top, just keeping an eye on those pencil lines I drew during the rough fit phase to make sure those look good. And finally, I'm also going to check the corner to make sure I'm getting a nice tight connection between the side panel and the back panel, all the way from the top to the bottom. So everything's looking perfect here, so now I can move on to securing the panel in place using the same screws and method that I did for the back panel. After that's done, I'm going to repeat the same exact steps that I did for this side panel on the other side, and that'll about wrap up this installation.
Okay, so finish screwing in the rest of your panels and score and snap off any shims you may have used. And also let the adhesive cure according to the manufacturer's instructions. Once that's done, that about wraps things up. Now the final step of this installation comes after your finished walls are in, like mine are here. You'll need to apply a bead of sealant to all of the outer edges of your wall set. Now the great thing about this wall set is you won't have to apply any sealant to any of the interior seams. Also, there are a lot of different options out there about how to finish up this project, but you'll probably want to add a shower door or a shower curtain. All right, now this looks great, and we hope our video was helpful. And we hope that you're as happy with your project home as we are with ours. Now remember, if you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.